I was standing at the sink working a greasy skillet with the soft side of the sponge and trying not to think about the late fees on the power bill when the phone let out that warbling municipal tone I had only ever heard in school drills and weather tests. It was 6:18 a.m., a Tuesday in late October, the kind of morning when the radiator clicks and the windows sweat on the inside. I had one foot braced against the cabinet because my left knee still complained from an old warehouse slip, and I was calculating whether a partial payment would buy a week when the alert filled the kitchen, hard and metallic, and the screen lit up with shelter in place. Unknown public safety incident. Avoid generators and idling engines. The wording was wrong in a way that made my chest feel hollow. I rinsed the pan, shut the water, and kept my hand on the faucet a second longer than necessary. From the back bedroom I heard Maya turn over, the mattress springs giving that small honest sound. She had school at 9, and her backpack was already by the door with the lunch we packed last night. We were ordinary right up until we weren't. Outside, sirens moved through the river valley and tangled with the morning trucks. A dog was barking in the next building, sharp and panicked. Not the usual at the mailman bark, but the cornered kind. I killed the radio that I like to run while I cook, unplugged the old coffee maker out of habit, and stood very still to listen to the building. The fridge hummed faintly. The ceiling fan ticked. Somewhere below, the old boiler coughed. Across the hall, Mr. Diaz used his key and slammed his door twice fast. I wiped my hands, took a breath, and went for the little jobs that make you feel like you're doing something. I filled the bathtub halfway, because that buys time even when it feels silly, and I put cold tap water into every bottle we had, and I checked the drawer under the stove for the roll of duct tape I'd half used putting plastic over the bedroom window last winter. My brain runs checklists when I'm scared. I grabbed the flat pry bar from the closet, the one with the nail puller and the chisel edge, and the stubby hammer that still had roofing tar on its head. I told myself I would look dumb in an hour, and I could live with that. The second alert came in while I was taping a towel over the bottom gap of the front door. It was shorter and worse. Do not approach affected persons. Avoid engine vibration and steady electrical hum. Shelter. If you work around machines long enough, you hear that phrase, steady hum, and you see the world as parts that shake and spin. I'd run maintenance at a distribution center for 6 years, and you can tell a lot from the feel in your foot through concrete when a motor is going. I went room by room and killed everything with a motor. The fridge I left, food would matter. The radiator was steam, no motor. The window AC was already out. I put my hand on the microwave out of habit, then laughed at myself and stopped. I took the flashlight out of our little emergency bin and clicked it. Good to go. 3 bars on the cheap rechargeable. I dug out the headlamp we use for camping and found one spare set of AAA in the Tupperware of junk. And because I am the kind of man who keeps junk screws, sorted by head type, I counted 2 packs of AA for the radio, 6 alkaline left unopened, and made a mental note not to waste them on anything stupid. Uncle Nate. Maya's voice was small and gummy with sleep. She stood in the hallway with her hair flat on one side and her t-shirt crooked. She's 9 and allergic to half the trees in Pennsylvania and smarter than me. And people who don't know her think she's shy. But really she's just measuring whether you deserve her voice. What's that noise? Alert, I said, like the weather app. We're staying home today, kiddo. No school. Her eyes went to the hammer, to the tape, to the tub. She is her mother's daughter. She sees the ledger before you tell her the story. Is Mom okay? She texted me an hour ago from the early shift. I said, because we keep our lies light in this house. Because they have to hold for as long as they have to hold. I'll try her again now. I sent the text. You good? Stay at work. Don't drive. No engines. And it went blue with no delivery confirmation, which could be nothing. I put Maya's sneakers by the couch and told her to eat a banana and drink water and keep the TV off. She nodded and did it. When fear came for me, it had simple hands, and they were on my shoulders, pressing me toward the peephole in our door, the way a dog leans when it wants to go outside. The hallway was a painted cinder block tunnel, and light from the stairwell made a stripe on the carpet. I saw the Diaz boy, hoodie up, running past with a baseball bat and the kind of breathing that sounds like the air is thick. A woman's voice yelled, "Don't, just don't." And then something hit the stair rail with a metal sound, and more voices poured in like water. I slid the chain across without thinking, then took it off again because chains are for people, and people talk to you. A chain makes you answer the door. The deadbolt was enough. The first real thing I saw was through the kitchen window when I checked the building's back lot. Mr. Ware, who ran his landscaping crew, had his truck idling with the hood up. He was bent over the engine bay and swearing. Two men came from behind the dumpster with that loose, inward-turned gait that means knee trouble, and for a second I thought they were drunk or hurt, and then the idling engine note changed, scavenged air, heavy, and both men snapped their heads like somebody had hit a tuning fork next to their ears. They didn't look at Mr. Ware. They looked at the truck, at the engine. Their eyes tracked the grill, like a cat tracks a red dot. The hair stood up on my arms in a stupid way. I said aloud to nobody, "It's the hum." And my own voice sounded unhelpful. It happened fast. Mr. Ware noticed them when they were close enough to see that their faces had gone slack, not sad, just off. He put up one hand and did the universal hey there thing and said something, and one of them reached past his shoulder into the engine bay, as if to touch the fan shroud. The other one climbed onto the bumper with both knees and put his whole head into the compartment, pressing his ear to the cover like a kid to a seashell. The fan caught his cheek the way a belt sander eats a finger. He didn't flinch. He didn't bleed right away. He just kept pushing into that hum while the truck idled and chuffed, and the whole bay vibrated. Mr. Ware yelled and shoved him back, and the fan caught his hand this time, and when the one on the bumper finally turned toward him, his face was all wrong, wet and stringy, like it was remembering how to be a face. I pulled Maya away from the window with my hand on the back of her neck and told her to sit on the floor behind the couch, and I ran to the breaker panel and took a breath and flipped the fridge off, because in that flat, bright moment I believed the sentence on the phone exactly. Avoid engine vibration. There's a line between power and noise. The compressor had been running. I felt like a traitor to my stomach and to common sense, but I turned it off and stood in the quiet and listened hard, and the building got smaller around us, but safer. In the hallway, the first body hit a door hard enough to rattle it, and then two more, and then a kind of low stuttering moan that wasn't theatrical. It was the sound a chest makes when it is driving air without help. The Diaz boy shouted something, and it broke. You don't get to choose your first kill. You get to hope it isn't a person you recognized 30 minutes before. I left Maya where she was and told her to hold the pry bar tight and not move unless I shouted her name. I took the hammer because it felt honest, and it fit my hand. In the hall, the light flickered because the building is old and cheap, and the ballast on that fixture has been on its last legs since July. At the top of the stairs, Mr. Diaz himself was backed into the corner with a laundry basket in front of him like a shield. The thing I'd seen through the window had found the stairwell and followed the vibration of the light fixture up. It wasn't fast. It was careful. It had one hand on the rail and one on the floor, and it moved like it was learning stair geometry fresh. There was dried radiator brown on its cheek from the truck fan. Mr. Diaz met my eye, and his mouth worked around the word please, and his forearms trembled. I didn't think. I came in on the left, where the wall gave me a blind corner to hide the movement of my leg, and I brought the hammer down at an angle, because I know you don't hit a skull straight down unless you want a chip to break off and make you miss. The hammer face hit just above the ear with a dull thunk that I will hear in my teeth when I am 80. The thing crumpled in a bad way that means joints are going the wrong direction. It tried to rise with its arms, and I hit it again harder, and its hands went soft. I stood there with the hammer in my hand and breath in my throat like a paper bag, and I said, Okay. Because you say that to yourself when your insides want to run. I learned something right there, and I filed it with the part of my brain that keeps bolt sizes and sidelines. Rule 1, I wrote on the inside of my skull. Headshot stop them, not just stagger. Stop. And Rule 1A, because I am that person. They're hungry for steady vibration. They key on it like a tuning. The two truths made a shape. When people talk later about how it began, they'll talk about news clips and hashtags and governments that said the right words too late. For me, it will always be two men climbing a bumper to get closer to a humming engine, and a hammer that felt like 50 pounds inside my hand, and my niece behind a couch in our lemon-colored living room, and a phrase on the alert that read like a machine manual. If anyone asks me what it looked like when we missed a turn, I'll say it felt like reading a manual for the first time while the machine was already running. It felt like the very first signs. How the world ends. I got Mr. Diaz into his apartment and dragged his laundry basket across the threshold as if that would do anything. He kept saying his wife's name. I gave him the pry bar because he knows where the bones are in this building better than I do, and because I wanted him to feel something with weight and leverage. I went back to Maya. We stood in our quiet and ate toast dry. My knee hummed with its own old pain the way a bad bearing hums, and I made a note to myself that pain is like a noise you can't turn off, and you have to work around it. We ration ourselves out loud because kids trust numbers. 1 banana left, I said. 4 granola bars, 6 if we count the stale ones. 6 liters of water if we include the Gatorade bottles. 2 candles I don't want to use. 1 cheap first aid kit. 1 headlamp with 1 spare. 1 flashlight with 3 bars. 1 hammer. 1 pry bar. No gun. 1 uncle who is not stupid but not a hero. 1 kid who is tired but brave. By noon the sirens had gone away, and the world did that late morning quiet that makes you feel like you might have imagined it. The lights in the hallway steadied. I turned the fridge back on for 20 minutes, long enough to chill what we had, then flipped it back off and told myself I was buying us another day in exchange for noise. I learned the rhythm then. Make a sound, pay the price, go still. Around 1 there were pops from the gas station 2 blocks over. Small concussions newscasters call sporadic, and men like me call somebody being stupid with a cigarette near fumes. A fire truck went by and then stalled. You can feel a stalled diesel through the soles of your feet if you're on the right kind of floor. I watched through the blinds and saw them come out of nowhere like they always do in stories. Except this wasn't nowhere. They came out of the white noise of the street and the hedges and the shape of the day, and they drifted toward the stalled truck like filings to a magnet. They put their hands on the hood like men trying to warm their fingers, and then they were climbing up into the cab, not to reach the driver, but to get their heads next to that wound-up but unpowered engine. I watched 2 firefighters run for it, and the things didn't chase them. They pressed their palms to the firewall and their cheeks to the metal, and they vibrated with the last little whisper of heat that metal gives off. They loved the hum. It was not a metaphor. It was a behavior. By late afternoon, we had a choice. Sit and hope, or move while we could shape the day and pick the terrain. Sitting is a choice too, but it doesn't feel like one. I weighed my knee and our food and the battery bars and the fact that my sister hadn't replied and the fact that we had 1 neighbor upstairs who will never stop the radio, which is to say we had a factory whistle inside our own walls. I decided we'd move 2 miles to the transit depot where the city used to park the buses because I had heard on a ham broadcast last spring that they kept diesel tanks and water barrels there, and because if anyone in this town had a clue it would be bus mechanics. We went light. We took 2 liters, 4 bars, 1 peanut butter jar halfway, 1 knife from the kitchen wrapped in a dish towel, the headlamp, the flashlight, the duct tape wrapped flat around the water bottle, the first aid kit, and 2 trash bags folded. I taped towels around our sneakers to muffle the sole squeak, because that squeak carries in stairwells. I put the hammer in my belt behind me, and the pry bar in my right hand and the knife in the pack, where I could reach it in the top zipper. I taped Maya's hoodie cuffs tight and tied her hair up so it wouldn't catch on anything. I ran the inventory aloud and let her correct me twice because it gave her a job, and kids who have jobs don't get swallowed by fear. We left a note on the inside of our door that said, "Went to depot. Do not start anything that hums." I left the door chained because sometimes stage dressing matters. The stairwell was the thing I had to survive to get to the part where I could protect her. My chest tightens in enclosed stairs. Ever since a pallet cage tipped in the warehouse, and I had to crawl under it, my body remembers dim angled space like a trap. This stairwell smelled like metal and clean dust. I went first, then Maya, then the pack between us, with my knee braced on each step and the pry bar held high. On the second landing, we met a man coming up with a length of pipe, and it looked like he wanted to be brave later, but had to go now. We did that quick nod good luck, that men do when there isn't time to be complicated. On the first floor, we paused and listened at the fire door. The outside world sounded like leaves and a far helicopter and something like a low radio tone that I couldn't place. We stepped into the alley and closed the door gently behind us, because even in the end, you don't slam a door if you can help it. We took a long L-shaped route to the depot, avoiding the main streets because cars were stopped at bad angles that blocked you into lines of sight you didn't choose. I kept us along brick so nothing could come at us from both sides. Twice we ducked into the mouths of parking garages to let groups drift past toward idling van generators. Both times the garages felt like they were humming themselves. The concrete transmits noise in ways you feel in your knees. On the second garage, I made our first test because it looked like a clean experiment and because you can't live on observation alone. Observation is a story you tell yourself. Tests are the part where the world gets a vote. The stairwell made a hollow echo. I took Maya behind the line of parked cars on level 2, told her to keep her head below the side mirror line and her eyes on me. I walked a quarter of the way down the aisle and used the pry bar to tap lightly on the concrete. Once, twice, a beat apart. In the open bay below, 2 of them turned their heads, but not to me. They looked the other way, toward a steady compressor hum I hadn't noticed yet, a maintenance unit in a closet with its door open. I tapped again, deliberately offbeat and louder. They didn't come. I picked up a drop key fob and hit the panic button. The nearest sedan went to full alarm, a rising 4-note whoop, and 3 more appeared in the ramp below, and all 5 of them headed not for the honk, but for a 4x4 idling with a generator plugged in. They crawled under it on their bellies to get close to the transfer case. I stood there breathing the garage breath, oil, cold water, faint rubber, and felt my fear reshaped into a tool. Rule 2, I wrote in my head. Intermittent noise confuses them. Steady vibration lures them. Not sound itself, sound with body. We moved while they were occupied, keeping my hand on Maya's hood so she could feel when I stopped and when I moved, because touch is quiet and clear. We reached the depot just before dusk. The chain link gates were closed and double-looped with cable, but a hand-painted sign on plywood said whistles only. No engines. Knock twice, wait, knock thrice. I don't love codes that fit on a sign, but I do love rules that make people slow down. So I did it. A face appeared behind a rectangle cut in the plywood, and a woman's voice said, "Hold up your hands." I held them up. "Turn," she said, and I turned. "Kid," she said, and it wasn't a question. "We don't put kids on runs," she said. "You understand." "I'm not giving her to anybody," I said in the same voice I use with bill collectors, calm like a rock. "We want a corner and water, and we can work for it. I fix things that hum." The rectangle snapped shut, and there was a series of small mechanical sounds that make me happy. A latch, a bar moving in a sleeve, a padlock dragged on chain. The gate opened just wide enough to admit us, and then closed like a mouth. Inside, the yard had been turned into a little town that ran on breath and discipline instead of fuel. There were color armbands made from cut t-shirts, green for runners, blue for maintenance, yellow for kitchen, red for security. There were chalkboards with the day's whistle codes, 2 quick for open side gate, 1 long for shut up now freeze, 3 for breach inside. Someone had draped tarps along the fence in wavy layers that hung like seaweed, and when the wind moved them they made soft, random rustle. They called them sound curtains. A white man in his 50s with a dispatcher's radio clipped to his belt and a rule book written in his face stepped forward and introduced himself as Vance. He looked hard at Maya, then at me, then at the pry bar. Behind him I counted 5 buses parked nose to make a wall, 2 shipping containers as a bunker, and a tent made from a billboard for a credit union that promised CAR loans you can trust. I felt the laugh I wanted to make and didn't. In the corner of the yard a generator sat on 4 old tires, cold and taped with a sign that read "Quiet hours all day." "We're no engines until we light up for radio at 2100, Vance said, and pointed to a chalkboard where "quiet hours" 24/7 had been written and then crossed out, replaced with "power window" 2100 to 2130, and a cartoon skull with earmuffs. Colored armband if you want to be useful. Blue for you. No kid on runs. She stays in quiet. Quiet? Maya asked, and the way she said it made two of the women look over and soften for a second. Quiet is a shipping container with rugs, Vance said. Books. Headphones with music, but no power. Other kids when there are kids. It's safer than outside, and it's the best we can do with what God gave us and what we took. He said the last part fast. The way you say a prayer you invented. We stayed because it would have been stupid not to. We traded 2 granola bars for a bowl of canned beans and a cup of water hot from steam. I put on a blue armband and spent an hour with a man named Tony lifting the generator onto thicker rubber pads to isolate it from the concrete. They like hum, I said, and Tony nodded like a man who had learned the same sentence at a different cost. He told me they'd lost 2 when a food truck idled in the street outside. The gate had held, but the fence had groaned under the weight of people pressing to get closer to the engine. He told me the whistle codes had saved them once when someone dropped a pot, and they all froze together, and the ones in the street went away because there wasn't a single coherent note to chase. We rewired the generator shutdown so that if it failed under load, it would not alarm. Alarms didn't bother them, but they called others. Vance didn't like that because it went against his instincts. He likes devices to tell him they're failing. I told him the fence would tell him. He didn't laugh. At 2100 hours, we lit the generator, and the yard changed in a way that felt like taking off a boot after a long shift. People sighed. The radio rack hummed and clicked. A teenager with a wrist full of friendship bracelets cranked a little offset alternator by hand and grinned at the power light like a campfire. The open radio took a band and held it, and a woman named Jazz hit the push-to-talk with her thumb and said, River City Transit, River City Transit, do you copy? Color code green 1 over. And got a voice from 6 miles away that sounded like home through a pillow. We had 30 minutes to make the world think we were still here. I stood under the tarp edge where the rain clicked and watched the fence. I could feel the generator through my heel, a soft presence like a cat leaning. I counted seconds between whistle checks. The world beyond the gate changed its sound around minute 16. It's like how you know a pallet jack is coming before you hear the wheels. You feel the signature shift in the building. A line of them came into the street and didn't mill. They made a slow arrow aimed at our corner where the generator sat. They put their hands on the chain link and stacked against each other. People say hoard like it is one thing. It is not one thing. It is this person and this one and the head that used to wear a union cap and the woman from the laundromat who is tall even when she is bent wrong. And they all wanted the same dull vibration as if it was food. I went to Tony and said, we have to shut down early. And he said, the fridge cycle. And I said, shut the damn thing. And we did. And the generator spooled down and the yard went dark. The fence did not empty. They stayed because metal holds heat. They pressed their cheeks to the bus grill. They made small grinding sounds with their teeth that I wanted to forget. Vance blew one long whistle, shut up freeze, and everyone in the yard stood like statues, and I could hear my own heart. After 5 minutes, 2 of them left. After 10, 5 more. After 15, the group was half. After 20, the fence was a suggestion of hands in the streetlight down the block, and the sound of wet clothing moving. That should have been the end of it for that night. It wasn't. We had a breach because systems hate us, and because men like Vance think rules are stronger than habits. Somebody in the back building plugged a phone into a battery backup to charge it, and the inverter sang a little high C nobody could hear unless they were starving for tone. The quiet container had its own fans for air. A girl inside turned on a toy that played ocean sound, and it looped a perfect steady breath. A man 3 blocks over started a portable heater. The fence groaned. Our front gate cable went tight. The bus blocking the far side rocked on its suspension. Jazz hit 3 short whistles, and your skin knows what that means even if you don't. In the corner, Tony looked at me in the exact tone men use when they're about to ask if you're ready to do something stupid that might work. Garage, he said. Garage, I said. We took 4 greens and 2 reds and no kids, because that was a rule I endorsed with my whole chest. We went out the side gate on the one whistle from Vance, slid along the cinder block wall, kept low so our heads stayed below the shadow line, and slipped into the parking garage across the street through the pedestrian door Tony's crew had wedged with chalk. We had a map in our heads of the levels, because maps are how you win without being stronger or faster. The columns were every 20 feet on center. The ramp spun up clockwise, and the stairwell sat in the southwest corner. The cars were at 40% occupancy, which is enough to hide a body and a man with a pry bar. We had 2 key fobs from a box labeled found. We had a brick and a roll of duct tape. The plan was not to fight. The plan was to ring the bell and leave the door open. On level 2, I picked the oldest SUV with an engine I knew would idle rough and loud. I climbed in, checked for keys because hope is cheap, then jammed the key fob into the column between wheel and dash and taped it in place at full alarm. Tony found a sedan with a sentimental alarm that played the siren song of 1998. He used a brick on the corner of the glass, a gentle tap under the rubber lip where it doesn't make a movie sound, and reached in to pop the hood. I ran the strap of my knee brace tighter and breathed through it. I set the pry bar against the concrete and pried loose a small chunk to throw. We waited for the ones in the street to find the first alarm. They turned their heads at the whoop and then drifted back toward the fence because the generator was louder in their bones than the song in their ears. Intermittent, we had learned. Tony looked at me and raised his eyebrows, and I nodded, and he slid into the SUV and unlatched the hood, and we both went to the engine compartment like thieves. We jammed a piece of metal against the serpentine belt to make it chatter. Then Tony started it with a flat screwdriver and a practice twist that told me he had worked repo once. It wasn't clean. It kicked and coughed, and then found a beat and shook the entire front end. The ones on the fence turned their heads as one. They walked. Not fast. Together. We went for the stairwell and took the first flight down to the sublevel where the echo is strongest. I put my back to the wall because walls do good work, and I counted silently. I count when I'm scared. When the first hands touched the SUV, we bolted the door with a rubber wedge and a length of rebar into the push-bar bracket. Those old doors take a pin if you know where to put it. The stairwell is a throat and sound is its breath. They will follow the hum to the place where it is strongest, and they will try to get to it even if there's a door in the way. That is a rule. We ran up 2 flights and crossed the deck to the far ramp. I set off the second car alarm, and we slipped out the pedestrian door into the alley behind the depot. We had bought the fence 30 minutes with 1 engine and a wedge. The cost was a vehicle we'd never use, and the knowledge that we had taught them a path. Choices are ledgers. We got the side gate shut and the cable back on, and I put both hands on it and felt the pressure of 100 fingers relaxed already because the hum they loved was contained in a place they could not see. That night I slept on the floor with Maya's foot against my leg because I needed to know if she moved. My knee throbbed like a low, constant drum. In the morning, Vance set his jaw and told me I had good instincts and asked if I'd be in charge of blue armbands for the week. He also told me, without saying it, that kid rules are kid rules and quiet was not optional if I wanted to keep a bed here. I nodded and went to work and resented him for being right. We learned the second rule the day after, and we learned it in a place where you are supposed to wear gloves, and you are supposed to sign a log, and you are supposed to respect the smell. The radio told us that the Water Authority had lost contact with the treatment plant 2 miles up the river. We all looked at the board like the board could change the river by getting written on. The water we were drinking still tasted like pipes. The decision came with a lack of it. If we wanted to flush toilets and boil and live longer than our bottles, we had to go to the plant, see if the gravity feed still worked, and if the plant could be put into a quiet mode. Vance didn't want to send a kid, which was fine with me, but he did want me because things that hum, and because I knew valves. I told Maya where we were going. She watched my face the way a dog watches a door. How long, she said. 3 hours, I said. If we're not back in 4, you go with Miss Jazz to the church on 33rd, and you wait for me under the second pew from the back, right side. She nodded. I'll count. We took 4 greens and 2 blues and 1 red, and we went not on the streets, but along the back of warehouses, and then across the rail bed where ballast skates under your shoes like ball bearings, and then through a tangle of knotweed that made a sound like paper tearing. The plant sat in a flat concrete bowl next to the river with 4 tall clarifiers, like giant spools. The air smelled like pool and penny. The front gate was open, not with violence, but with neglect. We went in with our heads low and our hands open and our eyes busy. I like catwalks. They tell you the truth about where you can stand and where you can't. We crossed the first on soft feet. The water below moved slow and green, and I found myself breathing with it like you do watching a baby. You are wrong to humanize geometry, but it's what our heads do when we need to be brave. We found them in the flocculation room, but we felt them first through the soles of our feet. A little tremor that wasn't our own and wasn't the river. The plant had thrown itself into a safe mode when the grid hiccuped. The big motors were off. The only thing still live was a small circulator pump in a sealed room, and it sang a faint song at a pitch I hate. The things were pressed against the door the way you press your face to a bakery window. They didn't push to get through. They pressed to be near. We stood in the hallway and watched their shoulders rise and fall in a rhythm that didn't look like breathing. They had dried on their clothes the way salt dries on a work shirt. One of them had a company badge still clipped to his pocket. His name was Eric, which I know because my eyes do not ask me permission to read. Tony turned his head and met my eye, and we both made the same face that says, "We're not friends with this, but we can use it." We worked past them on the metal catwalk 5 feet above the floor. They didn't lift their faces. They didn't look up. I owned the worst thought of my life in that moment, that we were invisible if the air was wrong. There was a brittle sweet smell in that room under the penny, chlorine, fresh and sharp. It made your tongue feel like it had a battery on it. There are signs everywhere in a place like that telling you to respect it. I put my hand over my mouth because my body wanted a filter and my eyes watered like an apology. I tore a strip from my shirt and soaked it in the trickle from a chlorinator seal. It stung my skin where it touched. I tied it over my face and breathed through my teeth and felt in my bones the wrongness of this. Then I stepped down off the catwalk onto the concrete 5 feet from the nearest of them, and I waited. Tony hissed a word that was half my name and half the noise a man makes when he can't change what is happening. The thing nearest me didn't change. It pressed its cheek harder to the panel that hid the little pump and made a small sound with its throat like contentment. I walked past it within arm's length, and my heart was a bird I was hiding under my jacket, flapping to be out. Nothing in the room followed. I learned Rule 3 without wanting to name it. Chlorine smell masks you from them. Not invisibility, not a magic trick, but enough of a wrong note in the air that the human exhale and the human sweat signature didn't rise above the background. Biology is a thing I don't pretend to understand. Behavior I can write in chalk on the floor, where everyone can step over it and not trip. I stepped back up onto the catwalk, and my knees shook, and I put both hands on the rail and I said, "Okay." And Tony blew air out like he'd been holding it for a year. We used that room to move through the plant, through doors we propped with rubber wedges, along catwalks that rang low under our feet, past tanks of water that smelled clean and wrong. We got to the control bay and found the alarm silent and the panels dead. We found the manual valves and looked at the diagrams taped to the door and talked in the kind of low voice you use to talk a man through a tight load on a forklift. "If we open the bypass here," I said, "the gravity feed will run and we won't need the pump. It'll flow dirty," Tony said. "Dirty, and what is better than dry?" I said, and he nodded because a man who's been thirsty knows it's true. We made our way to the big wheel. It didn't want to move. They never do. Valves like this need love. You give them once a month for years. I put my back to it and braced my bad knee and felt it complain like an old friend who forgives you while he yells. On the way back out, we passed the flocculation room again, and I did a thing I don't like in myself. I tested the rule again because the first time could have been luck. I pulled the rag aside and breathed into my cupped hand and waved my hand in the direction of the nearest face the way you do to check if a dog will look at you. It turned its head a fraction and then turned back to the panel, more interested in that little motor you couldn't even hear if you weren't half broken already. I put the rag back and stood there and did the arithmetic in my head. We could move people through here if we kept the smell wrong. We could be near them and not become them. You do ugly math when you need water. When we got back to the depot with the news, and with our clothes stinking like a public pool that caught fire, we were heroes for about 6 minutes, and then we were a problem, because every solution has a shadow. We can route, I told Vance. We can gravity feed without the booster as long as people fill at low taps and not at the second floor, and we can store in barrels and let the silt settle. Vance nodded like a man at a funeral. He didn't like anything about what we were saying. And if we're forced to run that little pump, we keep it in that room, and we keep the door shut, and we don't start anything else that hums in the building. He did not like trusting the radiators and the wind. He liked schedules and lots of little things doing their jobs softly in the background. That world was gone. He looked at the chalkboard like it might tell him how to have both safety and certainty. It didn't. He made a new rule. Waterline opens twice a day. Dawn and dusk. Quiet rules enforced by whistles. Generator window cut to 15 minutes. He was trying to save the calendar and the clock. 2 days of that routine carved grooves. We had jobs. I had a ledger. I kept my tools in a nail apron, adjustable wrench, flat screwdriver, Phillips, 2 hose clamps, 1 roll of tape, 1 pair of side cutters, 1 knife, 1 key for the plant gate. I had 14 rounds in a magazine for the 9mm we took off a security guard who didn't need it anymore in the garage, and 1 in the chamber, and 1 spare magazine with 9, and I counted them every night to make the number mean something. I had 3 bars on the flashlight and an extra AAA set for the headlamp. I had a knee that got hot at night and made stairs a negotiation. I had a niece who read to the little ones in quiet and kept the keys to the books because control is a blanket for a girl who has to sleep in a different bed. We had beans and rice and the last 2 bananas and a jar of peanut butter that measured a day when you looked at it the right way. Human problems slid in as soon as the monster shape stopped filling every window. A man named Shaw wanted the generator on for 30 minutes because his wife had asthma and he wanted the nebulizer. I believed him and still told him no. He decided that a rule he didn't like was not a rule. He tried to bring a gasoline inverter in under a tarp and run it under the bus with a blanket over it. I smelled it before I saw it. He told me I was a man who didn't have kids. I told him I was a man who had a kid he was not allowed to lose. He swung first. He swung wrong. Straight arm, shoulder up. I stepped inside it, and my knee barked, and I put the side of my fist into his ear the way you do when you want someone to hear ringing more than you want them to stop breathing. He fell in that pitiful way men fall when they've never been hit before. Vance blew a whistle pattern I didn't know yet. Red armbands came like teeth. They put Shaw in the bus with the cardboard sign that read trial. I hated that sign because it meant someone had said the word trial out loud and then made a sign to match it. They voted to let him stay, but they took his cigarettes and his watch, and they made him dig a pit for waste because that is how men make you remember. On the 4th night, a mistake ate our routine. It was stupid and human. A cook started the mixer to make dough because his hands needed to turn flour into something he recognized. He thought 15 minutes of generator would be fine if we did it at 1 instead of 9, because at 1 the world is drunk on its own quiet, and he was right about tradition and wrong about math. We turned the generator at 1:10 and the night changed. They came from streets we had thought were cleared by hunger. They came from inside cars where they had sat still and quiet because the compressor dampers hum when the air changes. They moved like men who have a job. They pressed to the fence, and then to the buses, and then to the gate. The cable sang. The hinges held. The padlock stretched in a way a padlock should not. A green went down on the far side, and his whistle fell out of his mouth into the street, and someone else blew 3 short, and then 2 short, and then a long, and the codes began to mix. And that was the worst sound we'd made in a week, because it was steady chaos. A patterned panic. We shut the generator, and the night did not unring. They breached at 1:26. When the bus at the corner lifted off its springs enough to slip their fingers under the bumper, and they made a lever, and you can move a lot with enough fingers. The yard went from our house to not our house in one breath. The red armbands formed a line at the mouth of the quiet container. I went stupid for a second and ran to it because my niece is not part of any policy. A woman I had eaten beans with 3 nights ago died in the gap between 2 buses because she was brave where she stood and the world didn't care. I got to the container and found the little ones pressed against the far wall with their headphones on, which is a rule we had invented for terror we did not want to feed. Maya saw me, and her face broke into a kind of relief that you don't get to see twice in a lifetime. "We go now," I said, and she nodded. We went not to the side gate where the breach was, not to the front where the cable had gone thrumming slack, but to the fence along the alley where the tarps made sound curtains. I cut the ties with the side cutters and pulled the tarp, and the chain link went bare and bright under the little security light, and I told Maya to climb, and I put my hands under her shoe and boosted her and felt her weight launch, and I went up after her with my knee screaming and a red band covering our back with a pipe. We dropped into the alley and ran low and crooked like rabbits do when there's a hawk. We didn't go home. Home had been a place where the world was smaller. We went east to the water plant because I had a rule I trusted, and because the river has edges that make maps for you when your brain wants corners. We cut through the parking garage, and everything in me pulled tight at the thought of that concrete throat of a stairwell. But I know the map, and maps beat fear. We set off a car alarm on level 1 to make a no sound that would keep them looking the wrong way. And we went for the pedestrian door, and then we took the rail bed, and then the knotweed, and then the bowl of concrete that smells like penny and pool. I had the key. We went inside. The plant at night is all hums you can feel more than hear, even in safe mode. The river itself sends a shiver through steel. The little pump was still behind that door, and the things were still pressing their faces to that door. And in the chlorine room the air bit your nose hairs and put a taste in your mouth that made your body say no. I soaked 2 rags in a bucket where a valve had wept. We tied them on, and we moved like ghosts in a room that didn't believe in us. Maya's hand in mine felt like a wire with current. We reached the catwalk above the settling tanks, and I thought about how long it would take me to lower a rope and haul a kid who weighs 65 pounds and a bag that weighs 15. I thought about numbers I know and numbers I make up when I need courage. The moon made a dirty circle on the water. We had to choose. The gate we came through would hold only as long as nobody thought to test it. If any of them tailed us, we had left them a dotted line on the map. The depot would either regroup or be a sound in a story later. The plant had a manual alarm that would call men with hard hats in a world that no longer had payroll. I could open the relief valve on the chlorination feed and make a cloud that would make the air wrong for 100 yards, and it would mask us from everything with a nose or lungs, and it would make us cough blood if we were stupid. The valve wheel was 20 inches across and stubborn like pride. The relief siren would sing a steady hair-raising note if I turned it. The steady note would be a beacon. The cloud would buy us minutes. The siren would buy us the opposite. Somewhere behind us, whistles blew a code I didn't know anymore. Somewhere in front of us, the room where the little pump lived throbbed like a small heart. If I had a manual for this part, it would be titled The Very First Signs, How the World Ends, and it would have a page with 2 checkboxes that both cut your hands when you touched them. I put my palm on the cold spokes of the valve wheel, and I looked at Maya, and she looked at me like she was reading a gauge on my face. My niece said it would fail me on the ladder if I waited much longer. The air bit the back of my throat like a warning and like medicine. Everything in me that loved rules weighed the algebra. Chlorine mask and siren lure versus silent air and visible bodies. I heard the steady tiny hum behind the closed door 20 feet away, and I knew what we were to them. Not people, not prey. Just things that make noise or things that don't. "I'm going to turn it," I said. "When I say hold your breath, you hold it. When I say go, you go. Keep one hand on the rail." "What if they come?" she said, and her voice was smaller than the plant, but it was strong. "We move before the note gets them all the way here," I said, and it felt like lying and like leadership at the same time. We use what we know. We use what we have. I braced my bad knee, leaned into the wheel, and felt it give a fraction with a groan like an old ship. Somewhere, the relief siren's test circuit woke up and took a breath. I looked at my niece, at the rag tied over her nose, at her hands on the rail, at the river holding its breath under us. I turned the wheel another tenth of a circle, and the siren found its steady note, and the night changed. And we moved because choices are only real when you pay for them.